Howdy folks, Jambareeqi here, and welcome to another episode of Jambareeqi Orange, the show where I let my patrons decide what I review. What were the options for this episode? Happy Halloween, Scooby-Doo, The Lighthouse, It Chapter 2, Vampire Hunter D, Perfect Blue, and Doctor Sleep. They chose It Chapter 2. 27 years after the events of the last movie, Pennywise is back on the prowl. Mike, the only loser who stayed in Derry, contacts Billy, Bev, Richie, Eddie and Ben so he can remind them about their childhood boogeyman and motivate them to fight again. Sadly, Stanley won't be joining them because he's decided to take himself off the board. However, no one is up to the task, but Mike then uses a spiritual ritual to help Billy learn about Pennywise's origins. It turns out that this clown is a shape-shifting alien who has lived on Earth for many, many years. In order to defeat Pennywise, Mike explains that everyone has to find a personal token of theirs in Derry, all while dealing with childhood traumas and new appearances of the evil clown. Much like the first chapter of It, I did not find this movie to be consistently scary, and that's once again down to the excessive jump scares, blaringly loud sound design, and lack of subtlety. The movie is trying so hard to frighten audiences that it goes off the deep end and does the complete opposite. It Chapter 2 prioritizes visual flair over suggestive vagueness, resulting in a movie that mistakes louder and bigger for scarier. Most attempts at scares consist of monsters running towards the camera while screaming, which is perhaps the easiest way to get a highly emotional reaction out of a horror audience. Each scene resembles the same formula too. A character returns to a special place, finds a nostalgic item, and then Pennywise appears in the form of a monster that reflects said character's fear, roaring or screeching as he chases after his victim, only to leave them alone shortly after. Even the childhood flashbacks recycle the same pattern. Sure, I get that the intention is to show that the clown wants to feed off their fear, and these adults must conquer said phobias or insecurities to defeat Pennywise. But there's only so many times I can watch the same scene again and again before it becomes predictable, and said expectations make me less afraid of what will happen next. The movie's explanation for Pennywise's backstory is another reason why I don't find him intimidating. I'm not sure if this origin detail was in the book because I've not read it, but a common criticism against horror sequels is that they end up over-explaining the monster. And that's what makes the threat less creepy, because suddenly the boogeyman makes more sense and is easier to comprehend.
Oh, did it work, Mikey? Did it work? Tell them why your silly little ritual didn't work. Tell them it's all just, what's the word, Eds? Gazebo.
That being said, there are some effective moments of tension to be found, but they usually come from Pennywise setting out to kill a child. Like a very atmospheric and slow-paced scene where the clown targets a little girl with a birthmark, as he uses manipulative empathy to knock her guard down.
You're not my friend, you're scary. Why are you crying?
People always make fun because of the way I look.
Only for the poor girl to become his next meal. There's also a part in the film where Billy tries to save a child from Pennywise in a funhouse maze. It's a nail-biting moment in which Billy is helpless while the child screams in terror, and the clown gradually breaks the glass wall with progressively faster headbutts. Unfortunately, scenes like this are far and few between. The movie is way more focused on the adults coming to terms with their childhood traumas, which is explored through the same monotonous encounters again and again. The other issue I have with this movie is that it shoehorns in too much humour, more than Chapter 1 did. The comedy certainly works for Richie's character, who uses jokes as a defense mechanism.
Can you see them yet? Crispy? Like fried fucking...
Guess you could say that was long overdue. Get it? Because we're in a library.
but the laughs become so abundant that they end up diluting the horror. The frequent jokey quips and quirky banter don't aid the terror, but instead make it a lot easier to digest the scares, because the comedic dialogue softens the blow.
What?
Hush, I'm pulling, moron.
Oh, thanks.
The film even turns one of Richie's own jokes into a punchline during the finale, which is supposed to be the most emotionally intense and cinematically dramatic part of the movie.
Hey, baby. Good boy. Shit! Next time we just go with regular scary. Next time!
Although, most of the problems I've been listing only affect the horror aspect of the film, which is an issue of course, because that's supposed to be the main genre of the film. But I will say that It Chapter 2 can be entertaining in other areas. Like, I mentioned the finale just now, and this is certainly the most imaginative bit of the film, from characters being thrown into trapped spaces resembling their childhood fears, to Pennywise growing into a giant arachnoid. It's such a wild and outlandish climax that it's hard to be bored by what's going on. I do also like how this finale works as a healing process for these characters, who've had their childhoods cruelly stolen away by parental abuse and Pennywise's torments. It's quite satisfying seeing each character facing their demons and finding courage as adults. These character developments also tie into how our heroes finally defeat the evil space clown, in a villain death that's both rewarding to watch and surprisingly a little pitiful too. So, this is one of the rare horror movies that can be put into the category of queer cinema because of its gay representation. When I first saw this movie in theatres, I thought it was pretty cool to see LGBT characters in a horror movie, especially since I'd come out as bisexual myself the same year it was released. But when it came to actually writing about this aspect in the movie, I wanted to do a bit more research. While I do identify as LGBT myself, I thought it was really important to hear other people in my community talking about their perspectives. And after reading many articles on this topic within the film, I have to say that I have a different point of view now. You see, the film opens with a gay couple enjoying the town carnival, only to be harassed by a gang of homophobes, who then proceed to physically assault them and throw one of them, Adrian, off a bridge. Adrian naively lets Pennywise save him from drowning, only to be feasted on by the evil clown. While I do think it's important to highlight how hate crime is still prevalent for LGBT people to this day, I have to admit that this scene is rather problematic after doing some research. This sequence was based on a real-life incident, the murder of Derry resident Charlie Howard. The film is recontextualizing a genuine tragedy to fit the Pennywise universe. These characters are never brought up again either, and they have nothing to do with the main story, except to have Adrian's killing serve as an alert to Mike that Pennywise is back. The closest reference to them again is a tiny and brief appearance by Adrian as a zombie. So this whole scene comes off as a cheap shock sequence that's borderline exploitative. Sure, Stephen King has stated that he had good intentions when basing the scene on Howard's death, and the movie's director wanted to include the scene so that he could show a variety of human evil. But I don't think that changes how uncomfortable it is that a real man's suffering was the basis for a supernatural fantasy story's opening, even if the real person's name was altered. Just because a writer or artist has good intentions doesn't inherently mean that their noble gesture is going to work out in execution. I guess I'd feel a bit more comfortable if I knew how Howard's family felt, but I can't find any confirmation of that, I'm afraid. I do hope that permission was granted. In an attempt to compensate for this, the character of Richie has an arc of accepting his own homosexuality, an adaptation change that Stephen King himself did approve. The problem is that the movie does a pretty poor job handling said plotline. Yeah, Richie's flashback of him facing homophobia after expressing interest in another boy is very heartbreaking to watch. It's a tender moment that LGBT people can resonate with, but then all dramatic potential is sapped away with everything that comes after. We cut back to present time, Pennywise is taunting an adult Richie as he stands between a hyper-masculine Paul Bunyan statue and a team of feminine cheerleaders, in a very on-the-nose visual allegory about his identity complex.
Did you miss me, Richie? 'cause I've missed you.
Then, in the finale, Eddie is sadly killed by Pennywise and Richie takes his death the hardest out of everyone. The film ends with Richie carving R and E on a fence, hinting that his playful mocking of Eddie was actually his way of harbouring his attraction towards his friend. Sure, this is a very relatable moment for those who have experienced closeted sexuality while in love, but up until this point, Richie's sexuality has only been relevant when Pennywise wants to torment him, and is brushed aside at all other times. He doesn't get to open up to the others, have a moment of pride to himself, or explore his queerness as an adult. The movie tries to have a sentimental ending about overcoming your trauma by embracing who you are, yet Richie's relationship with his sexuality is never concluded. Heck, his sexuality is referred to as his secret and nothing more, so it doesn't even get a dignified validation. Now, I'm all for subtextual storytelling, especially in a movie that's way too reliant on being over the top. But after years and years of timid queer coding and a lot of horror movies, this seems like a step backwards. Made even worse by how Richie's character arc is the film's only attempt at thematically connecting the brutal opening to the rest of the story. So, with all of this in mind, it's hard to honestly praise this movie's LGBT representation, which is such a shame when Bill Hader is giving the performance of his life as Richie, proving that he has both comedic and dramatic chops as an actor.
Come on, Richie.
Gotta go. Come on, buddy. Here, we gotta go, man. Let's go. Got it. Let's go. We can still help him, guys. We can still help him. He's got nothing. We gotta go. Whoa, we gotta. Guys, we can still help him.
To conclude, It Chapter 2 shares a lot of the same problems as its predecessor, as well as most modern horror movies in general. Everything about it is overindulgent, noisy, and repetitive, to the point where it seems to be condescending the audience. Couple this with ill-placed humour that softens the horror, cheap scares that are the equivalent of tasering the audience, and poor handling of queer themes. Then you have one flawed movie. However, it's still an entertaining popcorn experience, and I get its mainstream appeal. I mean, it certainly has a campy charm to its over-the-top nature. If you just want a supernatural black comedy to laugh and jump at with friends, then give It Chapter 2 a shot. But die-hard horror fans might feel disappointed by how misguided and uninspired it is. So, what do you think of It Chapter 2? Let me know in the comments section below. I've been Jambareeqi and I hope that you enjoyed this review. If you did, then feel free to like, subscribe and share. So, what am I going to be reviewing in the next episode of Jambareeqi Orange? Well, that's entirely up to my patrons. The options for the next episode include LEGO Star Wars Holiday Special, Children of the Corn, The Witches 2020, SpongeBob SquarePants Sponge on the Run, The Thief and the Cobbler Miramax Cut, and Over the Moon. That's a pretty awesome selection, am I right? Now don't forget that you have to be a patron in order to access this poll. What is a patron? Don't worry, I'll explain. This is my Patreon. It's a site for my fans to support me financially on through a monthly basis. Those who donate are called patrons. Patrons can donate as much as they want and are welcome to stop donating anytime. In return for their generosity, patrons are given exciting rewards based on their pledge amount. These rewards include early access to my videos before they go up publicly on YouTube, behind the scenes content, their name in the end credits of my videos, a chance to request a review of anything at all, and much more. I'm pretty excited to find out what my patrons want me to review next on the show. Cheerio, folks!